Is it possible for a single man to destroy more lives than an entire war? History isn't made only of heroes and revolutions. It is also woven with the hands of the worst monsters humanity has ever known. Dictators, conquerors, and tyrants who turned their countries and the world into killing fields. In this video, we won't talk about ideas. We'll talk about numbers. Chilling numbers. The exact death toll left behind by the 15 worst tyrants in history. Some did it for ideology, others for power, some out of hatred. All of them had one thing in common: they showed no mercy. So today, we're going to count down the most bloodthirsty leaders of all time. But before we begin, make sure to subscribe to this channel so you don't miss any story like this. And tell us in the comments which tyrant should appear in a future video. Now then, get ready to travel through the darkest corners of history, because what's coming is not for the faint of heart. Number 15, Idi Amin, the butcher of Uganda, 500,000 dead. How does a man become a monster? Some are born into war, others are shaped by it. Idi Amin, known as the Butcher of Uganda, didn't need a world war to leave an indelible scar on African history. He only needed power and a complete absence of conscience. He was a large, imposing man with a deceptively friendly smile and a disciplined military past. He had served in the British colonial army, where he learned how to operate weapons and how to break the will of other men. After Uganda's independence, he became commander of the National Army. And then, like all the tyrants you'll see on this list, he saw an opportunity. In 1971, with military cunning and zero scruples, he staged a coup. President Milton Obote was overthrown, and Idi Amin declared himself the supreme leader of Uganda. Thus began a reign of darkness. At first, many saw him as a liberator, charismatic, smiling nationalist. But behind the cameras and the speeches, hell was taking shape. Idi Amin expelled entire communities from the country, mainly Asians, and unleashed a brutal purge against any critical voice. His political enemies disappeared without a trace. Families found mutilated bodies floating in the Nile, or never found them at all. Fear was absolute. With support from the Soviet bloc, he strengthened his armed forces and authorized mass executions. Entire institutions collapsed. Doctors, intellectuals, religious leaders, all became targets of state terror. No one was safe. The brutality reached such grotesque levels that rumors of cannibalism emerged within the dictator's inner circle. And although many of these rumors were never confirmed, the mere fact that they were believable says a lot. His regime ended abruptly in 1979 when Tanzania invaded Uganda and forced him into exile. But by then, blood had already flooded the foundations of the country. It is estimated that at least 500,000 people died during his dictatorship. But Idi Amin was not the only one who hid his cruelty under the cloak of an ideology. Number 14, Vladimir Lenin, the father of the revolution and of the Red Terror, 1 million dead. Many remember him as a thinker, a theorist, a revolutionary who fought against Tsarism, but few dare to look beyond the black and white portrait, because behind the myth of the founder of the Soviet Union lies a truth stained with blood. Vladimir Ilyich Ulyanov, known as Lenin, was not only the leader of the October Revolution of 1917, he was also the creator of a power structure that turned the communist ideal into a machine of systematic repression. From the very first days of his rule, Lenin understood that to build a new Russia, he would have to destroy the old one without mercy. It didn't take long before concentration camps began to emerge across the territory. The so-called gulags received political opponents, rebellious peasants, religious figures, Cossacks, or simply citizens who didn't fit into the new order. One of the most atrocious episodes was the so-called decossacization, a brutal campaign against the Don Cossacks, a traditional and autonomous community. They were labeled enemies of the people, and the Red Army massacred more than 700,000 of them. It was not a war, it was ethnic cleansing, but it didn't stop there. The Tambov Rebellion, a peasant uprising against forced grain requisitions, was crushed without mercy. More than 15,000 peasants were executed. On the island of Kronstadt, sailors who had once supported the revolution rose up demanding democracy within socialism. The response was cannons, fire, and blood. Nearly 3,000 were killed. All of this happened while Lenin consolidated himself as the supreme leader of the new regime. Under his rule, millions died from famine, extrajudicial executions, and torture. The gulags filled up, and so did the cemeteries. And even today, many still revere him as a visionary. As if the cost of 1 million lives could be justified in the name of an ideal. Lenin was not simply a theorist. He was the architect of the Red Terror, the man who taught his successors that power is not taken, it is imposed through fear. Number 13, Yakubu Gowon. Oil and blood in the Biafran War, 1.1 million dead. Nigeria's independence promised a new era for Africa. It was the most populous nation on the continent, rich in natural resources with immense potential. But that promise quickly shattered in a storm of ambition, clashing ethnic groups, and blood. In 1966, Yakubu Gowon, a young army officer, emerged from political chaos after a series of coups. At just 32 years old, he became Nigeria's head of state. His rise was as sudden as his determination to keep the nation united at any cost. When the southeastern region, dominated by the Igbo ethnic group, declared independence under the name Republic of Biafra, Gowon responded with brutal force. Civil war broke out. It wasn't just a political conflict, it was a war for the soul and the oil of Nigeria. For 3 years, the Nigerian army bombed villages, blocked supply routes, and carried out devastating military campaigns. Images of malnourished children, their bellies swollen from hunger, shocked the world. But for Yakubu Gowon, it was all strategy. The food blockade imposed on Biafra was a deliberate tactic. No food, no medicine, no hope. Starvation was used as a weapon of war. While leaders negotiated in diplomatic halls, millions were dying slowly in silence. It is estimated that more than 1 million civilians lost their lives, most of them to starvation. Another 100,000 soldiers were killed in combat. And although the war ended in 1970 with Biafra's surrender, the scars remain open. Gowon was overthrown in 1975, not for his crimes, but by another military coup. He never faced justice. He lived out his life in peace, while hundreds of thousands of families mourned their dead. History will remember him as the man who turned hunger into his most lethal army. Number 12, Mengistu Haile Mariam, the revolution that devoured Ethiopia, 1.5 million dead. On the streets of Addis Ababa, bodies were found lying on the pavement at dawn. There were no identification tags, only a note pinned to the chest with a typed message. Enemy of the people. That was how Mengistu Haile Mariam ruled. The story of his rise is like many revolutions that promise justice and end in tyranny. After the collapse of Emperor Haile Selassie, Mengistu emerged as the leader of the Derg, a communist-oriented military junta that promised to transform Ethiopia. And it did, into a nightmare. Mengistu launched his regime with a campaign he called the Red Terror. In the name of the revolution, thousands of students, teachers, peasants, religious figures, and dissidents were executed without trial. Families were forced to pay for the bullet used to kill their loved one. That tax was shamelessly called the cost of the wasted bullet. The Derg forces didn't just arrest people. They broke into homes at night, dragged young men away, and executed them in public squares. The bodies were left as a warning. Neighbors knew they had to stay silent, or they would be next. But repression wasn't Mengistu's only weapon. His economic policies plunged the country into chaos. Forced collectivization, mass displacement, structural famine. Ethiopia became a global symbol of misery and despair. What the world's cameras often portrayed as natural disasters were, in many cases, the direct result of criminal political decisions. The famine was not accidental, it was engineered. It is estimated that his regime was responsible for the deaths of at least 1.5 million people. But Mengistu never faced justice. He fled to Zimbabwe, where he lived under protection for decades, the butcher of Ethiopia, sheltered in the shadow of impunity. Number 11, Kim Il-sung, the origin of North Korea's hell, 1.6 million dead. In North Korean schools, children are taught that Kim Il-sung was an eternal hero, a protective father, a living god. But the truth is far darker. Behind the golden statues and forced chants lies a regime built on the bones of its own people. Kim Il-sung came to power after World War II, when the Korean peninsula was divided by geopolitical interests. With the support of the Soviet Union, he became the supreme leader of the newly formed North Korea in 1948. What followed was a radical transformation, a closed, isolated state, shaped in his image and likeness. Under his rule, the economy was completely nationalized. Not a single decision was made without the party's approval. Anyone who questioned the system was eliminated. It didn't matter if they were a teacher, a farmer, or a high-ranking military officer. Control became absolute. During the Korean War, between 1950 and 1953, Kim Il-sung's regime carried out mass massacres. Entire villages were wiped out. Thousands were executed for allegedly sympathizing with the South or with Western imperialism. But even after the conflict ended, the repression didn't stop. It was only beginning. Political prison camps were established, known as Kwanliso. In them, entire generations lived and died without ever having committed a crime. Parents, children, grandparents, all were punished by association. Torture was systematic, hunger was constant, ideology was mandatory. And as if that weren't enough, an absurd yet effective narrative was promoted. The United States was the eternal enemy, responsible for all suffering. This was used to justify executions, internal purges, and extreme surveillance. During Kim Il-sung's rule, more than 1.5 million people died due to political repression, famine, and torture. His legacy did not end with his death. His son, Kim Jong-il, and his grandson, Kim Jong-un, would continue the dynasty of fear. North Korea became a cage with no escape. But while this Asian hell was taking shape, in the southern part of the continent, another dictator was pushing communist ideology to a new extreme. He wanted to reshape society from the ground up, and he didn't care how many lives he had to destroy. Number 10, Pol Pot, the genocide that wiped out a nation, 2.5 million dead. Imagine that one day the government knocks on your door and orders you to leave your home. It doesn't matter if you're a doctor, engineer, teacher, or student. You must leave everything behind and head to the countryside. Why? Your knowledge is considered a threat. Your education, a crime. This is how the most brutal and absurd experiment of radical communism in Asia began. And its architect was Saloth Sar, better known as Pol Pot. In 1975, after years of civil war, the communist group Khmer Rouge took control of Cambodia. Pol Pot declared himself supreme leader and announced his plan to transform the country into an agrarian utopia, without social classes, without private property, without intellectuals. only peasants working the land and obeying blindly. The city of Phnom Penh, the country's capital, was evacuated in a matter of days. Millions of people were forced to march into rural areas under a burning sun, without water or food. The elderly, children, the sick, everyone had to walk. Many did not survive the journey. Those who reached their destination found something even worse: forced labor camps, no medical care, barely any food. The conditions were inhumane. But that wasn't the worst part. The regime began a systematic purge against anyone considered an enemy of the revolution. Speaking a foreign language, wearing glasses, or simply knowing how to read and write was enough to be condemned. Torture was routine. Executions were massive. Bodies were buried in mass graves known as the killing fields. Between 1975 and 1979, around 2.5 million Cambodians, about a quarter of the population, were killed or died from hunger, disease, and exhaustion. It was a self-inflicted genocide, a country that destroyed itself, following the vision of a paranoid and fanatical man. Pol Pot never showed remorse. He died in 1998 without ever being held accountable for his crimes, and yet his ideology did not emerge in a vacuum. It was fueled by a chain of authoritarian regimes that used power as an excuse for extermination. Number 9, Ismail Enver, the architect of the Armenian Holocaust. 2.5 million dead. Not all genocides take place in concentration camps. Some begin with speeches, with complicit silence, and with the need to blame someone for a defeat. Ismail Enver was an ambitious Ottoman officer, a leader of the so-called Young Turk Revolution, and one of the most powerful men in the Ottoman Empire at the beginning of the 20th century. But his legacy will not be remembered for military victories or political reforms. It will be remembered for unleashing one of the most atrocious and least punished massacres in modern history. During World War I, Enver served as the empire's Minister of War. And in 1915, after a catastrophic defeat against the Russian army at the Battle of Sarikamish, he desperately needed someone to blame. He found it in the Armenians. The lie spread that the Armenian people, Christian and a minority, were conspiring with Russia to betray the Muslim Empire. Under that pretext, Enver authorized a campaign of forced relocation that was, in reality, a death sentence. Men were separated from their families and executed in mass shootings. Women, children, and the elderly were forced to march for weeks through the desert without food or water. Many died of exhaustion. Others were executed along the way. Those who survived ended up in improvised concentration camps where conditions were inhumane. But Armenians were not the only victims. Pontic Greeks and Assyrians were also exterminated by the hundreds of thousands under his command in what became a systematic campaign of ethnic cleansing. The numbers are staggering: 1.2 million Armenians, 830,000 Greeks, and 500,000 Assyrians killed. Nearly 3 million lives erased by nationalist hatred and the military incompetence of a single man. It was so brutal, so merciless, that decades later the word genocide would be coined precisely to describe what Enver had done. He died in exile, never facing justice. And although his crime marked a turning point in history, humanity did not learn. Because centuries earlier, another leader had already left an even longer trail of blood, not in the name of nationalism, but driven by the ambition to conquer the known world. Number 8, Alexander the Great, the conqueror who spread death in the name of glory. 3.5 million dead. They called him the Great, the perfect strategist, the man who, by the age of 30, had already built an empire stretching from Greece to India. But what many forget is that Alexander was also a destroyer of peoples, a relentless invader, and for millions, a name associated with terror. From a young age, Alexander was trained to rule. His father, King Philip II of Macedon, gave him an army. Aristotle, the most brilliant philosopher of his time, gave him an education, and the world, unfortunately, gave him the opportunity to conquer. After his father's death, Alexander launched a campaign that sought more than just power. He wanted eternal glory, an ambition fueled by blood. Cities that surrendered might have had a slim chance of survival, but those that dared to resist were wiped out without mercy. Thebes was erased from the map. Tyre was taken after a 7-month siege, and its inhabitants were crucified or sold into slavery. In India, his army crossed jungles and rivers only to face peoples who had never threatened him, and still, he massacred them. There are accounts of entire communities that, upon learning that Alexander's army was approaching, chose suicide rather than face torture, slavery, or death. Women were assaulted, children were enslaved, temples were looted, and all of it in the name of an imperial vision. It is estimated that around 3.5 million people died during his campaigns, not by accident, not by mistake, but as part of a deliberate strategy to conquer through fear. What is most disturbing is that centuries later, his name is still spoken with admiration, as if the size of his empire could justify the destruction he left behind. And while Alexander was being turned into a legend on the other side of the world, another leader was preparing to turn a nation into a machine of war. One who would push Japan to the brink of collapse and leave millions of bodies in his wake. Number 7, Hideki Tojo, the general who turned honor into a tool of extermination. 5 million dead. In Imperial Japan, honor was law, loyalty to the emperor was sacred, and for Hideki Tojo, that devotion became the justification for one of the most brutal campaigns of the 20th century. Tojo was not a typical dictator. He did not come to power through a coup. He was a disciplined, calculating military man who rose through the ranks of the imperial army until he became Prime Minister of Japan in 1941, just before the attack on Pearl Harbor. But behind the uniform and rigid demeanor was a fanatic. Tojo firmly believed in Japanese superiority and in the need to expand the empire across Asia. His vision was clear: dominate, crush, re-educate. And to achieve it, he applied a strategy of total war. Under his command, Japan invaded China, Korea, Southeast Asia, and parts of the Pacific. Imperial troops committed atrocities that still shock to this day. In Nanjing, thousands of women were assaulted. Civilians were beheaded for sport. Prisoners of war were used for medical experiments. Tojo implemented eugenic policies to purify Japanese identity, discriminating against mixed-blood families and foreigners. In schools, he promoted a nationalist and militaristic narrative, preparing children to die for their country if necessary. During the war, millions died: soldiers, civilians, dissidents, victims of experiments, of starvation, of bombings. The numbers vary, but it is estimated that at least 5 million people lost their lives directly or indirectly under his leadership. When the war ended, Tojo attempted suicide, but failed. He was captured, tried for war crimes, and sentenced to death by hanging. In his final words, he expressed loyalty to the emperor until the end. The world breathed a sigh of relief as the general fell, but his legacy of destruction was forever etched into the memory of Asia. However, there was another tyrant who, without the need for armies or invasions, caused 3 times more deaths. He did not do it on battlefields, but in the jungles of colonial Africa. And he did it all in the name of progress. Number 6, Leopold II of Belgium, the king who turned the Congo into his personal hell, 15 million dead. While Europe celebrated the age of progress and civilization, in the heart of Africa, one of the darkest chapters of modern history was being written. And the author of that nightmare was not a military dictator or a revolutionary leader. It was a European king, Leopold II of Belgium. In the late 19th century, obsessed with international prestige, Leopold decided his small kingdom needed something more, an empire. But Belgium had no colonial ambitions. So, in a bold and Machiavellian move, the king created a philanthropic front called the International African Association. Its stated purpose, to bring humanitarian aid to the Congo. Its real goal, to exploit its wealth. Leopold did not colonize the Congo for his country. He did it for himself. The territory, 14 times larger than Belgium, became his private property, and there, he established a regime of slavery disguised as administration. The main source of wealth was rubber, and to extract it, indigenous communities were forced to work under threat of death. Those who failed to meet quotas were whipped, executed, or mutilated. The amputation of hands became a systematic practice, even against women and children, as a form of exemplary punishment. Soldiers of his private militia, the Force Publique, were rewarded for each execution with gruesome proof. Severed hands presented as trophies. Terror was part of daily life. The jungle filled with screams, with hanging bodies, with villages burned to the ground. It is estimated that between 10 and 15 million people died during Leopold's personal rule in the Congo Free State. A silenced Holocaust, ignored by Europe for decades, until international outcry made it impossible to hide. Despite the global scandal, Leopold was never brought to justice. He died in his palace, surrounded by luxury, convinced he had done the right thing. But his boundless ambition was not unique. In the vast steppes of Central Asia, another leader dreamed of an even greater empire, one that would be remembered not only for its conquests, but for the brutality with which they were carried out. Number 5, Tamerlane, the conqueror who turned war into a spectacle of terror. 17 million dead. In the scorching deserts and wild steppes of Central Asia, a name emerged that would make entire kingdoms tremble. It wasn't Genghis Khan, though he claimed to be his spiritual heir. It was Tamerlane, the Prince of Terror, and wherever he went, he left pyramids of skulls as a warning. Born as Timur in the 14th century, he grew up in a world divided by rival tribes, decaying empires, and contested trade routes. From a young age, he showed a talent for strategy and a cruelty without limits. His dream was clear: to rebuild the Mongol Empire and rule from Delhi to Damascus. But unlike other conquerors, Tamerlane didn't just seek victory, he sought spectacle. Every conquest was a theatrical display of barbarity. He captured cities and turned them into graveyards. In Baghdad, he ordered the beheading of nearly 90,000 people in a single day. In Delhi, his army looted the city and massacred indiscriminately Hindus, Muslims, women and children alike. In Syria, he destroyed Aleppo and Damascus as if they were nothing more than obstacles in his path. At every step, he left a clear message: resistance meant death. And not just death, but death in ways the world still remembers with horror. The numbers are as staggering as they are chilling. It is estimated that his military campaigns caused the deaths of more than 17 million people, not by accident, not as collateral damage, but as part of a deliberate policy of terror. Tamerlane died in 1405 while planning an invasion of China. He was buried in a magnificent mausoleum, as befits an emperor. But his legacy was not greatness. It was fear. And as impossible as it may seem to imagine an even higher death toll, darker names still lie ahead. Because the next one didn't just conquer lands, he conquered minds, sowing hatred and building furnaces to eliminate those he deemed unworthy of living. Number 4. Adolf Hitler, the architect of modern hatred. 17 million dead. He was a soldier, a spy, an orator, But above all, he was the face of horror in the 20th century. Adolf Hitler didn't just unleash a war that set the world ablaze. He built an ideology based on hatred, racial purity, and the systematic elimination of the other. After World War I, Germany was a humiliated, impoverished, and fragmented nation. It was on that fertile ground that Hitler planted his message of resentment. He infiltrated a small far-right party, transformed it into the National Socialist Party, and designed its most infamous symbol, the swastika. With fiery speeches and promises of greatness, he won over the people. In 1933, he was appointed Chancellor. By 1934, he was already the absolute dictator of the Third Reich. From that point on, every decision, every decree, every invasion became a direct march into darkness. He promoted Aryan supremacy and persecuted Jews, Roma, homosexuals, communists, the disabled, and anyone who didn't fit his worldview. He imposed racial laws, censored the press, and banned political parties. And then he started the war. He invaded Poland, France, the Soviet Union. He set Europe on fire. But his most perverse project was not on the battlefields, it was in the concentration camps. Auschwitz, Treblinka, Sobibor, names that still shake the world today. There, extermination became an industry. Gas chambers, crematoriums, human experiments. It is estimated that Hitler was directly responsible for the deaths of at least 17 million people. Of those, 6 million were Jews, another 1.5 million were Roma, and millions more were civilians from occupied nations. Nazism was not just an ideology, it was a perfectly engineered machine of destruction, carried out with ruthless efficiency and inhuman coldness. Hitler took his own life in 1945 in a bunker beneath Berlin as his empire collapsed. He died a coward. He died without paying for every life he took. And yet, he is not the worst. Because while Europe burned in the lands of the East, another dictator was building a silent hell, killing his own people not with bombs, but with hunger. Number 3, Joseph Stalin, the man who turned scarcity into his deadliest weapon, 30 million dead. He didn't need to raise his voice. His mere presence was enough to paralyze the entire Soviet Union. Joseph Stalin was a silent, methodical, paranoid, and absolutely lethal dictator. His most powerful weapon wasn't the rifle, the tank, or the bomb. It was hunger. After Vladimir Lenin's death in 1924, Stalin took control of the Communist Party and, little by little, eliminated all his rivals. Those who weren't executed disappeared into gulags or were erased from official photographs. History itself was rewritten at his command. But the real terror began when he decided to forcibly transform the Soviet economy. Agricultural collectivization, rapid industrialization, impossible production quotas. Anyone who failed was condemned. In Ukraine, Stalin's policies triggered what became known as the Holodomor, a man-made famine that left millions dead. Grain was confiscated and peasants were arrested for hiding food. Entire families died surrounded by fertile fields, not because of drought, not because of disease, but because of direct government orders. Hunger became a political weapon, a form of punishment for rebellious regions, a clear message: fall in line or disappear. And when it wasn't hunger, it was the purge. In the late 1930s, Stalin launched the Great Terror, a massive campaign of arrests, torture, and executions. No one was safe. Military officers, intellectuals, workers, peasants, even high-ranking party officials. Trials were a sham. Sentences were final. Bullets were cheap. It is estimated that more than 30 million people died directly or indirectly as a result of his policies. Some from starvation, others in gulags, others executed without trial, all of them victims of absolute control. Stalin died in 1953 in his bed, surrounded by fear and silence. He was never brought to justice. Even today, his legacy divides opinion. For some, a war hero; for others, the butcher of the Soviet people. But even his staggering death toll is not the highest. Because before him, there was a conqueror who covered Asia in blood, and after him, a man who, in the name of revolution, erased millions of his own people. Number 2, Genghis Khan, the Emperor of Bones. 40 million dead. His real name was Temujin. He was born on the Mongolian steppes, the son of a tribal leader who was poisoned by enemies and spent his childhood surrounded by abandonment, hunger, and slavery. But from that suffering emerged one of the most feared and deadliest leaders in human history, Genghis Khan. He didn't just unite the Mongol tribes, he transformed them into a perfect war machine. With fierce discipline, innovative strategies, and limitless brutality, he launched a campaign of conquest that devoured Asia from China to Eastern Europe. But his power wasn't based solely on military strength. Genghis Khan understood terror as a tool of domination. Before attacking a city, he would send envoys with an offer: surrender or annihilation. If they resisted, his troops would wipe out everything: men, women, children, leaving nothing standing. And then they would build towers of skulls outside the city as a warning. In Nishapur, after the death of his son-in-law, Genghis Khan ordered the execution of every inhabitant. More than 100,000 people massacred out of revenge. In cities across what is now China and Iran, blood flowed through the streets like rivers. Ancient libraries were burned. Entire cultures were erased. Unlike other tyrants, Genghis Khan had no ideology. He didn't rule through religion, race, or politics. He ruled through absolute domination. He wanted the world to understand that resisting the Mongols was the same as signing your own death sentence. Historical records speak of at least 40 million people killed during his campaigns. Some estimates suggest that his conquests reduced the world's population by as much as 11%. In some regions, the land became so covered with corpses that it went uncultivated for generations. And yet, his image has often been romanticized as a great strategist, a unifier, a reformer. But the real history is far harsher. Genghis Khan was not a hero. He was the emperor of fear, a man who, in the name of power, left behind a legacy of destruction on an unimaginable scale. Number 1, Mao Zedong, the Great Leap into Hell, 78 million dead. His face appears on banknotes, his portrait hangs over Tiananmen Square, and his name, even today, is revered by millions in China. But behind the propaganda, behind the revolutionary myth, lies the deadliest dictator in human history, Mao Zedong. Leader of the Chinese Communist Party since 1943, Mao took absolute power in 1949 after years of civil war. And what was supposed to be the liberation of the Chinese people quickly turned into a nightmare of unimaginable proportions. Between 1958 and 1962, Mao launched his flagship policy, the Great Leap Forward. His goal was to turn China into an industrial power without relying on the Western world. The method: collectivize all agriculture, abolish private property, and force millions of peasants to produce steel in makeshift furnaces in their own backyards. The result? A total agricultural collapse. Tools were melted down, crops were abandoned, and food disappeared. But the party refused to admit it. The numbers were manipulated, the failures concealed, and millions starved to death. The famine was so catastrophic that some resorted to cannibalism. Villages were left empty. Entire families died without help. The numbers are devastating. It is estimated that between 20 and 45 million people died during this period alone. But Mao did not stop. In 1966, he launched the Cultural Revolution, a massive purge against intellectuals, artists, teachers, scientists, and anyone who didn't fit his vision of a pure communist China. Temples, books, and ancient works of art were destroyed. Indoctrinated youth, the Red Guards, became judges and executioners of their own teachers and parents. And as if that weren't enough, Mao orchestrated one of the most cynical acts of his rule, the 100 Flowers movement. He invited the people to criticize the government only to later arrest those who did. 500,000 people were silenced. Between purges, re-education camps, famine and repression, Mao Zedong was responsible for the deaths of up to 78 million people, the highest death toll caused by a single individual in all of history. He died in 1976, surrounded by a cult of personality, without trial, without punishment. And today, millions still remember him as a symbol. But history does not forget. Mao was not a glorious revolutionary. He was the architect of the greatest human tragedy ever caused by a single figure. And so concludes this journey through the darkest corners of absolute power. Men who turned ideals into excuses, nations into prisons, and millions of lives into cold numbers. Because when power has no limits, history stops being progress and becomes a warning. Thank you for watching all the way to the end. If you enjoyed this video and are passionate about this kind of content, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss upcoming videos and discover more fascinating stories. See you in the next video.